Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Daily Gwei Refuel, where I cap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and it's the 8th of April 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So a little bit light on content today because I did do a Saturday episode which obviously covered the news from Friday there. So I've only really got the news from kind of yesterday to cover, but there are a bunch of things that I want to talk about. And first things first, I received my physical edition of this ETH Investors Club report that I've talked about on the Refuel before, and it just looks awesome. I mean, you can see in the screenshot in front of me, or in the picture in front of me of it. I actually have it sitting next to me on the left-hand side here on my desk, and I've also got the normal edition as well. So there was a founders edition, physical kind of edition that you could redeem if you bought the NFT, and then there was a normal edition here, and I managed to get my hands on both of them there. Now, I do want to reiterate that this actual report is free to read online at ethinvestorsclub.com. It is not a paid report. You do not need to buy the physical edition. You can read it for free online, and I think the physical edition is pretty much sold out at this point as well. I remember I highlighted this for you guys on the Refuel, so hopefully some of you got your hands on it before it sold out. But at the same time, it wasn't just the physical edition you got by buying these NFTs. You also got the perks listed here, which you can find at the ethinvestorsclub.com website there. And I should disclose here that I'm an advisor to the ETH Investors Club effort, but all of the, I guess, money I would have made as an advisor is just getting donated to the Protocol Guild. So I've foregone any kind of like compensation here. But the reason why I joined on as an advisor is because I've wanted something like this to exist for a very long time. You know, a really comprehensive report on the state of the Ethereum ecosystem put out once a quarter by people who actually know what they're talking about, not by like the talking heads that you see on crypto Twitter, who have most of the time have no idea what they're talking about. These are people that are in the ecosystem, that are in the industry, that know what they're talking about, and they put this report together, and it's really a great read. I mean, I've gotten through, I think, most of it at this point, and it's just a really, really great read. So shout out to all the contributors as well, which are listed at the bottom of the website there. And you can see my little ugly mug at the bottom too, with a quote about how I always wanted something like this to exist. So yeah, as I said, you can go read it at ethinvestorsclub.com, as it's free to read. You do not need to buy the physical edition, but I do like that there's a physical edition because I really hope to kind of collect these as each quarter goes on and have a nice little kind of physical collection there. You guys know I like my physical collectibles more than my digital ones, so yeah, that one there. So I just wanted to give a shout out again to the ETH Investors Club effort. Go check that out. We'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so Obol has announced that Obol DV clusters are ready to be activated in Lido's simple DVT module on Ethereum mainnet, pending ETH deposits. So I believe this is the first big instantiation of DVT on the Ethereum mainnet. There is kind of DVT clusters running right now, more that so kind of like hobbyists and I guess like a bunch of test clusters. I'm part of one of them, basically trial clusters, I should say. I've been part of that for a long time now, but this is, I guess, the first foray of Obol into a big staking pool on Ethereum. Obviously, Lido is still the biggest staking pool in Ethereum, so it's great to see that they've gotten to this point. They've put together a Twitter thread here going through the fact that this has been a 2.5-year journey to get to this point. And I should disclose here, I'm an investor in Obol, but I invested in them a long time ago now. This project has been around for ages. I mean, if I go and kind of see when I invested in them on my kind of spreadsheet here, it was all the way back in October of 2021. So, we're coming up on 3 years this year. Obviously, it's been 2.5 years here, but they've kind of built this back when, I guess, like staking was so small, guys. Like staking back in October 2021 was still tiny compared to what it is today. There was no restaking. Any liquid staking that was being done was really just being done through Lido. The merge hadn't happened yet, so it was really just the beacon chain that was live, the proof of stake beacon chain as a separate network. Obviously, the merge didn't happen until a year after that, and we didn't really kind of know, like, unless you had the vision for it, where Ethereum staking would go. And I believed, at the time, as I still do today, when I invested in Obol, that DVT technology would definitely play a huge role in Ethereum staking. And I'm glad to see that we've already had, a bunch of clusters live on mainnet, but now they're integrating the technology with the bigger players out there, which obviously counts for probably a bit more because of the fact that these bigger players account for, such large market share on the network. But it's great to see that DVT enables things like squad staking, where essentially you can get together with 10 people total, you can all put up 3.2 ETH each, and then you all get to run the validators yourselves. You all get to run the full nodes and validators yourselves as part of that cluster. Now, I know that SuperFizz has run one of those clusters. I'm sure there's a few others out there, but I don't know of them off the top of my head. The cluster I'm a part of has 4 people in it, and we didn't put up the ETH ourselves. The Obol team did, because as I said, it was part of the kind of, I guess, like first bunch of clusters on mainnet, but we've been running the the software. I've been running the validators on my solo staking box alongside my solo validators, and it has been running just fine with a few hiccups here and there, given that it was part of like a trial run. We worked through those. The Obol software stack is very simple now. It has been kind of worked on for, this 2.5 years here, and they've tried to make it as simple as possible there. But yeah, kudos to them on getting this integration over the line, and I can't wait to see Obol DVT clusters start kind of spinning up as part of the Lido pool here. All right, so speaking of staking, there is a new Farcaster channel called StakeFromHome that I saw Superfizz talking about, but it's also hosted by a couple of other people here. So I just wanted to highlight this because you can go check this out for yourself and follow this channel on Farcaster. It has a lot of really awesome posts from everyone that is kind of like solo staking on the Ethereum network here, and you can actually see what their setups look like. So obviously you can see mine here. Mine, this is one of my boxes. This is the Proteus device that that Joe from Rocket Pool made. And custom made for a bunch of people out there. It did come preloaded with Rocket Pool software, but I basically re-imaged it and put a bunch of solo validators on there. Fun fact, as I said in the cast here, this little box runs all of my validators that are part of my retirement account. So my retirement account is 100% ETH right now. Like every cent of that is in ETH, and most of that ETH is staked. Unfortunately, there is some ETH left over that I can't get to 32 ETH in order to spin up another validator. But in the world of max EB, that won't be an issue anymore. So I'm looking forward to that, of course. But yeah, that's what this box runs. Whereas I have my other boxes as well. I have my Rocket Pool box, which is separate, which runs my Rocket Pool validators. I have my archive node box, which runs an archive node. And then I have my solo staking box, which runs my solo staking validators, of course. But that's just my setup. As I said, you can see everyone else's setups that I've posted here in the Stake From Home channel. It's relatively new, I believe, this channel. So there's not, hundreds of kind of posts yet, but there are, a healthy amount, which I like to see. And I'm hoping that this Stake From Home channel can actually be a nice little home for people who essentially want to, get started staking from home, or want help with their setups, or want ideas about their setups. And I'm really hoping to see this channel take off here. So I just wanted to highlight it for you guys. You can go check it out. I'll link the channel in the YouTube description below. And just a reminder, guys, if you're not on Farcaster yet, definitely get on there. I mean, the kind of community keeps growing, not just within the Ethereum side of things, but just across the whole kind of spectrum here. And it's only going to get bigger from here. I do believe that Farcaster has now kind of has now gotten to the point where essentially it has a, way more of a chance of succeeding than failing. There's always that kind of inflection point when you start a company or start a startup where you have to get your first initial customers and get product market fit. Well, I think that Farcaster has at this point achieved product market fit and has a very loyal base of people that want to stay on there, that want to keep growing it, that want to be part of, something like Farcaster, especially in the face of Twitter basically degrading over the past couple of years in its experience there. Even though people still use Twitter, I mean, I use Twitter and Farcaster basically equal amounts these days, because of the fact there's still a lot happening on Twitter. So that's the thing, you can still use both. There's no need to just give up Twitter and come to Farcaster. I mean, by all means you can do that, but you can still use both. And a lot of the time people will cross-post between, the two channels. That's what I try to do between Twitter and Farcaster here. But at the same time, there is a lot of stuff still happening on either platform that isn't on the others there. So it is definitely necessary to use them right now. But Farcaster goes beyond just being kind of like a Twitter kind of alternative, I guess you could say. I wouldn't call it a clone. It's definitely an alternative. It goes way beyond that because of all the Web3 native features, not just the kind of stuff like channels, which aren't actually part of the Farcaster core protocol yet. They're actually just part of Warpcast, the client. But things like the integrations with the frame stuff, the NFT stuff, the stuff like, I showed, I think there's a few weeks ago, I showed that there's a way to do like a whole Shopify experience within a Farcaster frame. Like, stuff like that. Basically being able to mint NFTs directly in your Farcaster feed. That stuff is not available on Twitter, and it's highly unlikely that it is going to be available on Twitter. But I guess it's available on Farcaster because Farcaster is first and foremost a crypto native platform, but obviously they want to grow it further and further from there. But for now, it is pretty much like, I'm going to say 99% of it is crypto, to be honest, but that's fine. Those are the first users. Those are the first kind of people getting on there and making it what it is and growing it from there. So yeah, just a shout out there. Go follow the Stake From Home Farcaster channel if you're interested in that sort of stuff. But also, if you're not on Farcaster yet, highly recommend getting on there if you haven't. All right, so I put out this cast today where I said that EIP.4844/blobs has been such a blessing for Ethereum when it really needed it most. We're going to onboard the world to Ethereum, and I couldn't be more excited. And this was basically spurred off of a comment that I made in the Daily Gwei Discord channel where I said that 4844, or blobs, I should just refer to it as blobs, came at like the perfect time, right, guys? Like if you actually notice all that's happened in the last, month? It hasn't even been a month yet since blobs went live. Essentially what we had is a very big shift in narrative from Ethereum can't scale, layer 2s are garbage, layer 2s are too expensive, how's Ethereum ever going to scale, so on and so forth, to, oh wow, Ethereum can scale, oh wow, these things are cheap, oh wow, the experience is actually really good, oh wow, the concerns around liquidity fragmentation, are overblown, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to talk a bit more about liquidity fragmentation at the end of the episode, but that's kind of what I've seen happen over the past, as I said, it hasn't even been a month yet. And obviously, it's also kind of, I guess, helped the narrative that Solana, for example, is undergoing, I guess you could call them growing pains right now, where essentially their network is getting spammed and the user experience has degraded a lot. And I think that there are, fixes coming for that. They've talked about these fixes that they're going to do in these patches that they want to put in place. But from everything I've seen, it's a much more fundamental issue than that. It's based on the way that Solana is architected as a network, which means that it's going to take longer to fix than people would like. Whereas on the flip side of things, we just did a massive upgrade to Ethereum L2s and they're puttering along just fine. But I'm not going to compare the two just yet. Obviously, a lot of the Ethereum L2s are very centralized right now. They still have their training wheels on. They're at stage 0. Base, for example, one of the L2s has taken off a lot recently, has no fraud proofs because it's part of the OP stack yet. It will once it goes live once the OP stack gets their fraud proofs hopefully soon. But yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that they're decentralized or anything like that. They're definitely not right now. But I just think that from a narrative point of view and from like a sentiment point of view towards Ethereum, blobs went live at the perfect time. And it's great to see that costs have remained relatively low as well. They haven't been as low as when blobs first went live, but they're still very, very low compared to what they were. There's still a 90+% reduction compared to what they were. And also the layer 2s themselves are full steam ahead working on scaling their own execution up. Base is obviously doing a lot, and I've highlighted that, but so is Arbitrum with Stylus. The other L2 ecosystems are doing it. And in their own different ways there. So yeah, as I've said plenty of times before, we are definitely in the golden age of Ethereum scalability here, and the timing has just worked out so well, especially because, if the market keeps going from where it is now, we're entering the, I guess, like beginnings of the late stages of the bull market, I would say. And these stages could last, 6 months from here or something like that. It could even last longer than that. But the way I kind of define it is that in the later stages of the bull market, you basically get a smaller multiple on, on kind of like a lot of the assets that have already gone up a lot, but you have like a massive influx of these new people that come in, and they tend to just buy anything basically based on whatever they see, on YouTube, on TikTok, elsewhere, and that's why you'll see the whole market going up together. I remember the other day when I got a lot of shit from people basically saying that I don't really believe that there's any, big wave of net new money coming in just yet, when I put out that tweet. And basically what I believe is that it's just crypto natives. And it's still that, but we're getting to the point now where we're going to start seeing, this influx, because BTC is going to be hitting new all-time highs every day soon. And then ETH is going to be hitting its all-time high soon. And that's going to bring media attention in. And where do you think a lot of these people are going? Well, they're going to Coinbase. Okay. Where do you think Coinbase is going to push these people? They're going to push them on chain. They're going to push them to Base. And Base is right now, one of the fastest growing L2s. I think it is the fastest growing L2. And obviously the fact that people are going to be pushed to base means it's going to keep growing from here. So I do think that L2s are going to be up only from here. And as I said, the timing around blobs going live has been just perfect. We couldn't have timed it better, really, at the end of the day. But it's been great to see that there. But speaking of Base as well, I did want to mention here, talk a little bit about their growth. I know I've talked about them a lot recently, but I haven't really talked about the other L2s that much recently. But it's simply because Base has just grown so much. Obviously, you see people talking about it on Twitter, and you see people kind of coping about it, saying that it's a coordinated push or a coordinated marketing effort, which is so bizarre to me that people say that, but I guess that's how people cope when things that are growing that they thought weren't going to grow. But Base has definitely been growing at a pace, I guess, faster than all the other L2s right now. But in saying that, if you go to L2Beat and look at the kind of growth here, Arbitrum has been dominant for so long, guys. Like, I think people forget that, yes, Base is going through a, huge amount of growth right now, but that's because they're starting from a very kind of, I guess, like low base, and pardon the pun, right? They're starting from basically zero. And also they launched a lot later than Arbitrum 1 did as well, and OP Mainnet did, and others out here. But there's no denying their growth, of course. But when it comes to Arbitrum, they've had such a healthy and sustainable ecosystem for such a long time now. I remember back when Arbitrum did their token drop, the ARB drop, everyone was like, everyone was only using Arbitrum because they're farming a token, so they're going to, go off Arbitrum and go somewhere else now. And that didn't materialize at all. Arbitrum just kept growing. And it's a huge kudos to the efforts from Off-Chain Labs and the Arbitrum community writ large there. But it's always funny to me when people say these things. It's like, why would people bridge off of Arbitrum 1 when there are things to do on there and you can do them with cheaper fees? Like, it's always kind of funny when people say that, because they're basically saying that in the hopes that that's going to happen, and it's just a narrative they are pushing. Whereas reality, when reality meets narrative, the narrative crumbles. And that's going back to what I said earlier about the fact that some of these other ecosystems out there, these other L1 ecosystems out there, well, all of them pretty much, they make all these grandiose promises of what they can do. And to be fair, Ethereum did this once upon a time. I think Ethereum is very guilty of this in the early days of 2016, 2017, maybe even as early as 2015, of over-promising and under-delivering. But when it comes to the ecosystem at large, and especially with these other layer ones, every single project does this. They over-promise and then they under-deliver. That's a theme within crypto, is that all the projects do this, and that's because there's a financial incentive to do this. Your project will be rewarded, with a lot of kind of market cap, so to speak, even if the project has basically no fundamentals behind it, nothing behind it, no usage, nothing. And I think the most obvious example of this is things like, Cardano, for example. I remember Cardano in the last bull market went absolutely nuts, and there was no one basically using the chain because there was no freaking smart contracts to use the chain. So essentially you had the market rewarding the narrative, rewarding the promises, and then as soon as smart contracts went live, that was the top on ADA, on Cardano back then. So the reality sets in, and then people realize that, everything's not just going to automatically port to Cardano when they have smart contracts live. It turns out Cardano is not actually that good and not that scalable, and everything that Charles Hodgkinson has been saying on his vlogs on his YouTube channel, is actually just him dreaming up things that aren't even reality. So that's what I mean by the fact that the crypto ecosystem overpromises and underdelivers, because it gets rewarded for that. You make a lot of money doing that. And we've seen this time and time and time again across pretty much every project within crypto. And as I said, Ethereum is not innocent here. But I think that Ethereum and the Ethereum ecosystem, if we're talking about Ethereum and L2s, they tend to not overpromise too much. Some of them will, here and there, but not that much these days, right? Maybe in the earlier days, as I said, they did. But these days, it seems that at least I try to do this, is that we underpromise and overdeliver. That is what you should be doing. Is you shouldn't be hyping things up. But I understand why people hype them up, is because there's a monetary incentive attached to it, and it works. That's the thing. If it didn't work, people wouldn't do it. But it works. It works every cycle, and it doesn't just work. It works absolute wonders to basically pump up this vaporware, this stuff that makes no sense being worth tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and then people bid it up there. And then if you're in the know, and that this is kind of like quicksand, essentially, where once these retail normie investors go, once the bear market hits, this thing's just going to fall apart. Then that's when you kind of start selling out, right? Because the game, essentially. And this happens across so many projects. I didn't mean to pick on Cardano, but I think that was just a perfect example. For those of you who had been around last cycle, what that looked like. I remember just the crazy run up it had, because there was so much hype about Cardano getting smart contracts 7 years after Ethereum had them, mind you. But then you can go look at the chart. When they launched smart contracts, the chart topped, the price stopped. And then I remember reading comments on Reddit from people being like, oh, why can't I do this transaction? Or why is it only 1 TPS? And then people were like, well, this is how it works. This is the EUTXO model that Cardano is using, and this is why it is this way. And everyone's like, what? I was promised something else. Yes, you were promised something else, because the narrative is always able to be kind of shielded when there's no reality to break it away. But as soon as reality comes into it, you can't ignore the reality anymore. And I talk about this so much on the Refuel, guys, and I think it just keeps coming true and more true every single day. Where essentially, as soon as narrative meets reality, it cannot be a narrative anymore. It crumbles. And that is, I guess, true for bad narratives, for good narratives, and everything in between there. But enough on that kind of stuff there. I just wanted to point out that not only Base has been growing, but all the L2s have just been growing. We had that economic stimulus package, as I like to call it, with EIP 4844, and it got delivered at the perfect time there. Now, to wrap up today's episode, I did say I wanted to have a discussion around this kind of I guess I'm not going to call it a narrative, but like this concept of liquidity fragmentation that has kind of been a talking point for many, many months now among both, people who like Ethereum L2s and people who don't like Ethereum L2s. So I started off, I put a tweet out where I said the L2s that create liquidity fragmentation, and I called it a narrative here because it is a narrative, has always been very weird to me. Every chain is siloed off from every other chain. If you want to do something on Ethereum L1 and you're on a different L1, you have to bridge. There is no way around this. So let's expand on that point. Let's say, for example, you're on Solana, you have some funds on there, and you're like, oh, I want to go use this app that's on Ethereum. Maybe you want to go use Uniswap, right, on Ethereum, whether that be at layer 1 or layer 2. Well, you have fragmented from that. Your liquidity is now fragmented from that ecosystem because it exists on a different chain. So you either have to bridge to Ethereum L1 or L2. So the point of that point, I guess, is that this liquidity fragmentation doesn't just exist for L2s. It exists for every single chain out there. And what is amazing to me is that, this isn't obviously the perfect world that we want to live in, where people want, one single unified layer that we can do everything on, but it is the reality of what we live in. Ethereum is not trying to build for a world that they think should exist. We're trying to build for a world that already exists, and the world that already exists is a multi-chain fragmented ecosystem. That is how it exists. But at the same time, we should be building better ways to, I'm not going to say re-centralize the liquidity, but like bring it together, right? Defragment that liquidity. And we are, like I've talked about it before. We have, things like the AG layer coming. We have things like shared sequencing. We have things like pre-confirmations. And we can do those things in a much safer and much easier way with L2s. Because, as I said on my tweet here, doing interoperability between layers that share the same root of trust, aka L2 settling down to Ethereum L1, is much easier and much safer than trying to do interoperability between different roots of trust, aka different layer ones. Ethereum is working towards this with the aforementioned things I just talked about there. And I want to expand on this point a little bit here because you may be confused why it's easier and safer. Because of the fact that the settlement is happening on the same layer, on the same Ethereum L1 layer here for these L2s, you don't have risks like reorg risks besides the Ethereum L1 reorg risk. And that's a big one. Because, for example, let's say that you want to do interoperability between Bitcoin L1, Ethereum L1, and Solana. Now, let's say you want to build an interoperable bridge between them, like that is fully composable, that is atomic. Not these bridges that we have that are kind of crypto economically secured and you have to like wait. I'm talking like, and it's not, they're kind of like, they're not really interoperable like the way I'm talking about it right now. They're not really composable. They're not atomic. But if you wanted to do that, you would basically have to be safe, wait for Bitcoin, because you have to wait for the slowest block. So Bitcoin has on average 10-minute block times. Ethereum has 12-second slot times with the block being in that slot. And then Solana has 400 millisecond kind of block times there. And that's just the first issue, right? Is that you have to wait for Bitcoin because essentially, if you don't wait for Bitcoin, if you initiate a transaction that involves Bitcoin and it gets reorged on Ethereum L1, well, then you have a problem now on Bitcoin, and now that hasn't been settled basically. So essentially, what you have is different trust assumptions here and different kind of settlement guarantees between these different layers. On top of that, you have different architectures. Bitcoin and Ethereum have a mempool, Solana doesn't, right? So there's all these things that go into it because you're now relying on different roots of trust. You're relying on different kind of, I guess, like areas of protocol rules. And maybe an analogy here is something like if you want to interoperate between the US, China, and Australia. I added Australia in there because because I'm in Australia. But the way it's done is through trade agreements, basically, where all the parties come to the table and say, okay, well, we agree to abide by these rules, we agree to these trade conditions, and it works for everyone. Like, you could, in theory, do that for interoperability between the layer ones, but the problem is that there's no kind of like governing body of these layer ones, right? So it would fall to the protocols that are actually building these things to set their own rules, and then essentially they would have to make sure that they set the rules in place that they can't kind of like have security issues with this. Whereas when it comes to interoperability between the L2s, yes, they probably have to coordinate on different solutions, but at the same time, you don't have to worry about all this extra overhead of like reorgs from different layers talking to each other. You don't have to worry about different architectures of the different layers. You're all settling down to the same root of trust, to the same Ethereum L1. You're all under the same rule set. Just like in the US, you're all under the same rule set of like the federal laws, or I mean, obviously this analogy is loose here, but on a state-by-state basis, there are different kind of regulations there. But you're all under the same kind of federal laws, where in Ethereum, you're all under the same protocol rules by settling down to it. So I think from that perspective, and I think you can view the L2s as states in this case. So, all the L2s are under the Ethereum kind of like umbrella, but then the L2s themselves are independent kind of states that, have to follow the rules of the Ethereum protocol, but can set their own rules as well. And then within them, you can have layer 3s, which are maybe cities within states that can have their own rules. And then you can go like even higher and layer 4s to councils and like local councils, stuff like that. And apps, being the businesses. The analogies work loosely, but I think you guys get my point here, and what I'm trying to say is basically that it is much safer to do interoperability between things that share the same roots of trust, aka layer 2s here. So back to, I guess, finish this up with the original discussion around fragmented liquidity. I do want to also add here that I think that these L2s have more than enough liquidity, like the top ones, for the vast majority of users. Because if your size is size, and if you're trying to sling 6 figures, 7 figures of assets around, and you need more liquidity, well, you're going to be on L1 anyway. Like, you're going to pay the L1 fees. Like, and this is another issue that I think people don't realize is that, okay, if you've only got $100 to play around with, then sure, you're going to be on L2s because you're not going to do a trade on L1 because a trade could end up eating, half of your money off of just gas fees. So then, okay, you don't need that much liquidity because you're only playing with $100. But if you're playing with like $100,000 or $1 million, you're not going to care about paying a $50, $100 fee on layer 1 because that is basically a rounding error to the money that you're playing with. So a lot of people just don't focus on this point, which is just bizarre to me. And then at the same time, these bigger players can also play on L2s. And they don't mind paying the bridging costs to go between L2s, and they also don't mind having to wait, maybe 10 minutes or something to go between these L2s on the different bridges, because of the fact that for them, they're operating with such size that it really is just like a small, if any, it's not really an inconvenience to them, right? Whereas if you're a smaller player, I get it, the costs ramp up pretty quickly for you, but the thing is that you can actually sit on Arbitrum 1 or on Base today, and you can pretty much do most of the things that you want to do on those layers. I know that some things happen at different layers. Like, for example, there might be an NFT mint on Base, but you can't mint that NFT from Arbitrum 1 because of the fact that you have to be on Base to mint it. But this is the same issue that exists today with other layer 1s. If I want to go do something on another layer 1, I have to bridge there from Ethereum. Like, I can't just do it without bridging there to begin with. And then people say, oh, well, you can just withdraw from a centralized exchange and instead of bridging. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can do that for layer 2s as well. You can withdraw from Coinbase to layer 2s. Like, so all of these narratives just fall apart in like the stupidest way, because this should be obvious to people. This should be obvious to crypto natives. This should not be something that I have to convince people of, but evidently I do. But I hope that, generally, I know that I'm preaching to the choir when I say stuff like this, because a lot of you guys are aligned on this frame of thinking. But my goal as well here was just to explain to you why I think that this narrative is just like total crap, and why I think that anyone who brings up this narrative is basically just trying to do it to deride Ethereum, because we've always had liquidity fragmentation among chains since the dawn of this ecosystem. I mean, maybe not the dawn of Bitcoin, but basically since there was an economically relevant fork of Bitcoin, which was Litecoin. If you were on Litecoin and you wanted to send BTC to someone, well, you'd have to go to a centralized exchange, trade that LTC for BTC, withdraw it out to Bitcoin, and then you could do that, right? So that right there is liquidity fragmentation. So I think that my overall point is that TLDR, it's a non-issue. And TLDR, we are fixing it. And we are making it an easier kind of thing to deal with. Even though I believe it's an overall non-issue, we are making it easier on the user experience side of things with things like ag layer and things like shared sequencing and pre-confirmations and so on and so forth there. But I think on that note, that's probably going to be it for today's episode. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.